talk a little bit about what happened here in Ohio on Tuesday. You're likely not to like much of what I say, but hey, that's the bitter medicine we're going to have to swallow. For all of my comments, what I will say to you is most of you will have to suspend what you think and believe because, I mean, majority of Ohioans don't agree with you, and majority of Americans don't agree with you. And that's something that's tough for all of us, I think, to have to grasp in some ways, because we think we see it so clearly that we can't imagine how others don't see what we see. And I know that's hard to think through. So let me walk through, and for anybody who's interested, more extensive comments than this, I'm writing a 7-piece series on National Review online in the corner. You can find all 7 parts of this, what I'm going to walk through today, in detail on there with all the stats and figures and all the fun stuff. So if you go to National Review and go look for Battleground Ohio, you'll see this. Parts 1, 2, and 3 are already up. They have 4 and 5, and I'm writing 6 and 7 this weekend, so you're going to get a preview of that today. So for us to figure out what happened in Ohio on Tuesday, we actually have to go back a bit, and we have to go back to Ohio's primary, because I think Ohio's primary foreshadowed what was going to happen on Tuesday. And here's why. When you think about our primary back in March, we had a competitive Republican primary. The Democrats had a competitive primary back in 2008, but not this year. When you compare the 2 primaries, their competitive one 4 years ago, our competitive one this year, 1 million more Ohioans turned out and voted in theirs compared to voted in ours. 1 million more. Now, you knew the president was going to lose some of that support given the last 4 years, but losing 1 million, all 1 million, was probably unlikely. And I think part of what we saw on Tuesday was that reality. If you dig a little bit deeper into the primary numbers, you see something else that I think is really part of what happened. In March, Rick Santorum won 69 counties. Those happen to be the most conservative counties, your reddest counties, what we would classify, frankly, as the base of the Republican Party, right? Your most conservative folks. Rick Santorum won those. Well, that necessarily isn't a surprise. He was the more conservative candidate in some respects. But what was a surprise, and many people don't know this, is that Mitt Romney in those 68 counties, 69 counties, in 40 of those counties, he got fewer votes than Mike Huckabee did in 2008 when it wasn't a competitive primary, that McCain had locked up the nomination essentially. Think about that for a minute, that Romney got fewer votes in 40 of Ohio's 88 counties than Huckabee did 4 years earlier in a largely uncompetitive primary. So what that tells you, and what it told me, and I said this back in March, is Romney has problems with Ohio's base voters. And I think you saw that on Tuesday when they frankly didn't show up to the degree they needed to in order to defeat President Obama. Now, one of the things that we heard so much about was this enormous ground game that was going to show up on behalf of Romney. And, you know, the reality is we had a smaller turnout this election than the last election. As you think you may have heard, President Obama is the first president to get reelected with a smaller number of votes. That's an enormous thing, and that was true here in Ohio. The other thing is, if you can believe it, and it's hard for us to remember what 2008 felt like. 2008 was a done deal. It didn't matter which Democrat ran, it didn't matter which Republican ran. After the financial crash in mid-September, the Democrat was going to win no matter what, and the Republican was going to lose no matter what. You remember that? So that was McCain, and McCain was a terrible candidate, right? But nonetheless, the die was cast. The die was cast. The thing that's remarkable is that as of now, we're still counting provisional ballots, but my guess is this number won't improve much, is that Romney actually got 93,000 fewer votes than McCain did. I mean, how is that possible, right? Obama won Ohio by 107,000 votes, which means the delta between what Romney lost to McCain and what Romney lost to Obama is about 14,000 votes. So had the McCain voters just showed up for Romney, we were talking about a 14,000 vote delta at that point. That's a pretty remarkable number, if you ask me. So part one talks about that. So that's one thing that happened. We saw that back in March and it never got fixed. Never got fixed. Number two, united we win, divided we fall. One of the things, and you may disagree with me on this, because some of you may have been involved on the winning side on this, but I will tell you, it was not a smart thing for us to have here in Ohio, which was the internecine battle between John Kasich and Kevin DeWine over control of the ORP. I mean, I don't know how in any presidential year, knowing it was going to be a tough election, it makes sense for the Republican Party to fight amongst itself while the other side was methodically doing its ground game, identifying voters, doing micro-targeting. We were busy with what we had our candidate busy in a primary through mid-April. And at the same time, from winter into the spring, we actually are spending money and time and resources going out, figuring who's loyal to whom in the Central Committee, running against our own people, getting candidates to primary other candidates. Also, the victor can have the spoils of what is the ORP. Further delaying the execution of a ground game that was vitally needed here in Ohio. Vitally needed in Ohio. Again, you may think that was the right thing to do because some people don't like Kevin, but I will say to you, whether you like him or not, spending time and money doing that versus other things didn't help us win on Tuesday. Next, about that ground game. You know, I happen to know Aaron Pickerel, and that name probably is wholly unfamiliar to most of you. But Aaron is the guru behind the Ohio Democratic strategy. Aaron ran Strickland's 06 campaign successfully. He ran Obama 08 here in Ohio. He ran Strickland 2010, and he essentially was the guru behind Obama 2012. Now, do the math, he won 3 out of 4 of those. And the fourth one, 2010, despite a historic nationwide Republican wave, and when most other Republican statewide offices were being won by 10, 15%, Strickland barely lost re-election, 77,000 votes. So he almost got 4 out of 4. What Aaron and those guys did, and Aaron said this to me on Thursday, is Obama for America never shut down. We hired our 2012 team in March of 2009. And they spent the last 3 years methodically setting up all over Ohio, over 137 field offices compared to Romney's 40, right? And they spent 3 years combing through all of their micro-targeting data, figuring out which voters were where, what were the messages that they cared about, neighbor to neighbor, knocking on doors many, many times. The ground game that we thought we had, but we didn't, they actually did have, and they had it in spades. They had it in spades. And that project, right, what we had was Project Orca, which more and more people are talking about what a debacle that was. You know, I got an email from an activist in Ohio, and this is what he said, I quote, "If one thing could be said about the approach to GOTV by the two campaigns is that the Romney campaign seemed to focus on the quantity of contacts, whereas the Obama campaign focused on the quality. The Romney campaign pushed out email after email telling us how many millions of telephone calls and doors they knocked on, but what they didn't tell us is those calls went unanswered or ignored, and the doors they knocked on either received no answer or didn't have enough voters, all the types of things." I mean, you've heard this, you've seen this with your own eyes, right? And when it came down to it, let me talk about what the exit polls show in Ohio for the ground game differential. The black vote jumped by 4 points in Ohio from 08 to 12. The white vote declined by 4. 18 to 29-year-olds remained the same. Female vote went for 4 points more than the male vote went for Romney. So they beat us, right? Romney won the male vote, but Obama won the female vote by 4 points more. Liberals went for Obama by 88%, as conservatives went for Romney by 81%. 7% difference. Our base had problems. Moderates went for Obama by 57% of the vote. While Romney won independents by 10%, those votes along with Republicans were only 31% of the vote. See that? Too many stayed home. Democrats represented 38% of the vote. Right? There's that +7, +8 delta that you heard that wasn't going to be the case, but again, it was the case. Okay? And while Romney won the suburbs by 4 points and the rural areas by 22 points, Obama won the cities of over 50,000 by 34 points. And those voters were 24% of the electorate. So you can't have those deltas and expect for your rural voters, where there's few voters, to really overcome that. Geographically, in the Cleveland area, 19% of all voters versus Cincinnati, 27% of all voters. Obama got 60% of the Cleveland area. Romney got 52% of the Cincinnati area. Again, you can't have that delta and expect to pull out a victory here, especially where Obama won Central Ohio by 4 points, Eastern Ohio by 3, which means where Obama won accounted for about 58% of all votes. Okay, math isn't there. So that becomes the ground game problem. Next, something, if anybody's heard me talk about this before about the book, there's a whole chapter about this in the book, the impact of ginos, what I call ginos, journalists in name only. And this is that liberal media. You know, we've heard a lot about that at the national level and the national media bias, but I have to tell you, it's just as pervasive and worse at the state level. You know, Jason Hart over Media Trackers did an enormous amount of work this past election cycle, pointing out the bias of PolitiFact, the Cleveland Plain Dealer's objective, call it as they see it, fact-checking tool, where that the guy in charge of that is a registered Democrat, and 08 was just an avid Obama fan. You think for a moment he can set aside that bias as he's trying to produce work and put out unbiased work? I doubt it. You know, but it's worse than that. I have talked about it, and I talk about this in the book, if you recall, that the enormous problem here in Ohio with conservative ideas and conservative positions getting a fair shake in the 6 major newspapers and whatnot. And I talk about how, you know, when I ran the Buckeye Institute, we put out 10 major reports, did a huge survey of Ohio that we got released, revamped the website, and the major newspapers didn't cover a single one of those things. In my new think tank, Opportunity Ohio, been around for a couple months now, we released another survey of Ohio, including the presidential Senate race. We did a major paper on energy issues with the war on coal, war on natural gas, and oil. Didn't get any coverage in the media. With those types of things, how do you expect our candidates to prevail if the voters of Ohio aren't exposed to both sides of the story? They get the liberal side, the think tanks that come from the left, the positions of the left get articulated in the best possible light, and ours either get put in the worst possible light or in no light at all, right? They never even see the light of day. That becomes an enormous problem if we're going to try to actually compete in the battlefield of ideas, which is what elections really are. The next one, which you'll hopefully read the next few days if you go to National Review, is what I call the hearts versus minds. We conservatives are really good at the minds, but we stink at the hearts. And the left is phenomenally good at the heart, and they don't really care about the mind, because they know hearts win. Let me give you some examples of that. And again, you may actually disagree with me vehemently on this, but I'm telling you, the exit polls show this to be the case. We spent an enormous amount of energy trying to show how the auto bailout was a stupid, bad idea, right? We tried to argue that, oh, they should have just let these automobile companies go bankrupt and through the normal course of bankruptcy come back out. And we think what would have happened would have been fine. We would have had all these things happen as they would. We were talking in shoulds, coulds, woulds, when they were talking in dids, what did actually happen. Taking the position in Ohio that tens of billions of dollars of federal loan money, that bailout, had no or a minimal impact on Northern Ohio's automobile industry, doesn't pass what George Will calls the sniff test. Because in the day-to-day lives of the people up there who went from plants closing, people in the supply business going out of business, massive job losses, those plants reopened, those companies came back, and that could have happened with the normal bankruptcy as well. But the problem is, that's not what happened. And so for us to take this position and argue, as the Romney campaign did, as Republican did, as think tanks in Ohio tried to do, we were arguing against the reality of what actually happened. That wasn't going to win. And in fact, on exit polls, 60% of those voted favored the auto bailout. Of those, Obama won 74% of the vote. right? And you know why? We were talking at the mind level. Facts, figures, data, theory, economic theory of bankruptcy. What were they talking about? Joe, who lost his job at Lordstown but now got it back, right? Sue, who was working for one of the part suppliers that lost her job but now got it back. And how her family now has some financial footing and are back on the road to recovery. Hearts, not minds. Hearts, not minds. Right?
Matt?
Yeah.
How would you have responded to that then, as a candidate?
Well,
he was actually challenged on his position when he said, I wouldn't have supported a bailout.
Right.
What would you have done?
So there's two things, right? Number one, that goes to the flawed element of Romney, right? He should never have written that New York Times op-ed. Never. I mean, well, I don't know why he did, shouldn't have. But he did. Answer the question, move on. The problem is, we didn't. We kept trying to hammer it again and again and again, right? We kept putting out more and more stuff about how, oh, the auto bailout was a bad thing. We kept trying to fight it without them even wanting to fight it, right? And then, in fact, 2 weeks before the election, when they came out with that brilliant ad on shipping the Jeeps, things over to China, you then had 2 auto companies say that's crap. And we essentially, the Obama campaign, Aaron will tell you this, they just sat back and said, by all means, argue that. They didn't have to do anything. Because again, we kept fighting battles we could not win in northern Ohio, right? Right? Another issue was Benghazi. I don't know about you, but I'm on Twitter, and I have to tell you, I was shocked by the amount conservatives spent on Benghazi. Don't get me wrong, it could become a scandal in a second-term administration. That isn't the point, though. This was not a national security election. But conservatives, whether it was talk radio, TV, Twitter, I don't care who it is, spent god-awful amounts of time litigating Benghazi in the Obama administration. And you know what exit polls showed in Ohio? So few voters actually had that as a top 4 issue, they couldn't even measure it. It was a non-factor. But you could not escape talk radio, TV, Twitter, without Benghazi being the biggest issue being pushed by the right. Absolutely major mistake. This was not a national security election. Again, I firmly believe what the president did was wrong, and this will be a problem for him. But this isn't about being right on the issue. This is about which issues are right to fight in a heated political battle. That makes it, there's a big difference between the two, right? The next one, when it came to the economy. Do you realize how hard it must have been for Governor Romney and his campaign to fight a jobs and economy battle in Ohio when John Kasich is standing up every opportunity he could, saying how great it's going in Ohio? I mean, I'm serious, right? I don't mean to pick on the governor. People who know me know I'm a critic of him, and I don't think he's as good as everybody else thinks he is. But I have to tell you, those pain moments when poor Romney is sitting on stage, having to sit there and go, oh my God, you're undermining everything we possibly can say. Again, the Obama campaign would tell you there was no better cheerleader for them on jobs in Ohio than John Kasich. He did more to harm the Romney campaign's argument here than anybody else did, because he kept saying, look how great it is. It could be even better if we didn't have Obama. Could be, should be, would be. Well, what it is, it's going great, isn't it? Really hurt the ability of Romney to get traction on that issue here in Ohio. Exit polls, 32% of Ohioans said unemployment was the top problem, right? That was the unemployment rate, that's the big battle. Obama won that group by 5%. 2% election, 5% is a big deal. 5% is a big deal. Lastly, on the issues. We kept talking all about that federal deficit and debt, and we are right to have that as a concern. If any issue is going to lead America down the path of decline, it will be our debt and deficit, simply because at some point, the interest on the debt swallows all of federal revenue, and you have to then raise taxes to a degree that becomes wholly confiscatory, and we will no longer be a country that can operate, right? But that is a 500 or 100, right? It took Rome 500 years to decline. But that is a in the future conversation. But we talk about it all the time. Most Ohioans don't think that's a big issue. Again, I know you, that's, oh, what? How can that be the case, right? How can that be the case? Only 14% of Ohioans named the federal budget deficit as a top problem. And Romney won those folks with 71% of the vote. So for the 14% that really care about that issue, he won 71% of the vote, right? 20% of Ohioans thought there was another issue that was more important. Healthcare. Healthcare. On healthcare, for those 20%, Obama won those by 73%. 73%. So look, 71% of 14 and 73% of 20, which one would you rather have? Right? And here's what's so interesting. The folks on healthcare, more folks thought that we should expand it or leave it alone by 1% than scale it back. Who do you have to thank for that? Chief Justice John Roberts. That decision in June gave the Obamacare the legitimacy it lacked and took that really off the table as an issue. Now, again, that goes back to another flaw with Romney was Romney Care is not the contrast, right? It made it really hard for us to argue that, and he never felt quite comfortable making that argument. Had you had another candidate who had not done Romney Care, my guess is we would have litigated health care far more vigorously than we did. But he never felt comfortable doing that. Because keep in mind, just 1 year earlier, 67% of Ohioans voted for the Healthcare Freedom Act, which was a direct repudiation of Obamacare. So I tell you, John Roberts did more to undermine that than anything else you can possibly imagine. Let me go with one issue I skipped over in terms of when I talked about the get out the vote, the ground game issue. I don't know if you've heard this talked about much. Senate Bill 5. Obama increased the share of union households by 4%. 4%. Which means, in a 2% election, 4% is a lot. So my guess is, they said they would, 2011 was a great dry run for them, and there were folks who are conservative in nature, teachers, firefighters, cops, who said, I'll never vote for a Republican again. And I think maybe that 4% includes some of those folks. Not all of them, but some of them. Some of them.
Wasn't the bailout part of that too?
Oh, sure. Of course the bailout's going to be part of that. That's why I said some of them, right? Not all, but definitely some. Now what I call the intangibles. This is kind of the smorgasbord of things out there. Let me talk to you about a couple of them. So, anybody here, Charlie Cook, writes for National Journal? He's one of the smartest guys kind of in the political world in America. He wrote a column about 2 weeks ago. So, some of you, I don't know if you know this, but I do predictions on outcomes in Ohio. I look at the numbers, I go county by county, and I issue my projections. So just so you know, in 2010 I said John Kasich would win between 31,500 votes and 100,000 votes. He won 77. So that's pretty darn close. This year, Monday night, I issued my predictions publicly. And I said there are two models, a strong Republican turnout and what I call an equalized. Not an equal turnout, but an equalized. And I said in the equalized version, Obama will win Ohio by 50.3%. Right now, he's winning with 50.18%. So I feel pretty good about my ability to call and look at this state, okay? So 2 weeks ago, when all you heard was this enormous turnout and the Romney, they were crushing it in these 35,000 Westchester rallies, all these types of things, and then you had this diversion between the national polls and the swing state polls. And I kept thinking, my God, and my numbers, I kept running my numbers, and they kept coming back the same way. And I kept thinking, how am I wrong on this one? How are all these swing states? I don't get the divergence, what's going on here? Charlie Cook wrote a phenomenal article that finally put it all together. And this will make sense, I think, for you. What he said was, look, in about 40 states containing the vast majority of people, they never saw a single attack ad over the summer about Bain Capital or Mitt Romney. Not a one. Because they're not a swing state. Nobody spent money. Those are the really red states and the really blue states. There was no money spent. They didn't see any of those ads that we saw all summer, defining Mitt Romney before he could define himself, right? But the swing states, they saw every one of those ads, and he had been defined. And so what Charlie Cook said is, when that first debate happened, and Romney performed so well and Obama so poorly, The reason why you saw the national polls jump like they did is because in those 40 states, that was really their first look at him. And for them, he looked pretty good. But in those 10 states where they had seen all those ads, the increase for him was much smaller. Much smaller. And that's why you saw such a swing in the national polls versus the swing state polls. And over the course of October, the swing states returned back to Obama, right? And Romney never led in most of them, but they got more favorable for Obama as the month wore on. And those national polls took a longer time to come down, right? And that made sense. That finally clicked for me personally. When I saw my numbers versus what was going on in these national polls, that I just couldn't seem to make sense. That made sense, right? We saw the stuff that tore Romney down, and nobody else did. So it was harder for him to scrape out from that than it was in a state where they'd never seen those negative ads, right? And I'm still astonished that a Massachusetts politician failed to see the lessons from 2004, John Kerry, when John Kerry was successfully defined by the Bush folks in that summer, so that by the time he actually, Labor Day came, he had been so defined that it was so hard for him to win back. The same thing happened to Romney. I cannot believe the Romney campaign went silent all summer and allowed themselves to be defined by the Obama campaign and served it so well. Number two, and I wrote this back in March 2011, back in Washington Examiner, if you want to win Ohio, I cannot imagine why Rob Portman was not on the ticket. Just can't imagine. Ohio is a necessity for Republicans. Wisconsin is a nicety. There's a difference. We last won Ohio in 2004. We last won Wisconsin in 1984. The odds that Wisconsin was going to swing this way, which hasn't happened since Reagan, and Mitt Romney is no Ronald Reagan, were highly unlikely. Same for Michigan, Pennsylvania, right? All states that have not gone Republican since '84, by the way. Minnesota, 72, in case you were wondering. Nixon was the last Republican to win in Minnesota. Okay? If we wanted to win Ohio, Rob Portman gave Mitt Romney the greatest chance to win Ohio. That's nothing against Paul Ryan. He's a very, very good guy. Like lots of his positions. But again, we are the state that matters for Republicans. And if you want to win, Rob Portman would have given you a far better chance than not. Why? He's a senator statewide appeal. Paul Ryan's a congressman from a single district. There's 8 of them there in Wisconsin. He doesn't have name ID in the whole state of Wisconsin, like Portman does, right? Another issue, the Romney versus Obama stuff. Let me tell you show you what some of the exit polls showed. More in touch with me. Obama won that 50-46. Favorable, unfavorable. This is in Ohio. The national polls are going to be different than this, by the way. Again, there's that nationals, those other states that never got the advertising versus our state. But in Ohio, favorable for Obama, 55, unfavorable, 43. Mitt Romney, favorable, 50, or 45, unfavorable, 50. He was down -5 in Ohio. Those are those ads from this summer, right? Bain Capital, right? People saw him as essentially Thurston Howell. Obama's policies favor the rich, middle class, poor. Rich, middle class, poor. 10%, 43%, 36%. The great middle class, 43%, said Obama's policies favor them. Only 10% the rich. Got that? And 36% is poor. Romney favoring rich, middle class, poor. 56% rich, 35% middle class, 1% poor. Heart versus mind. Even rich people, middle class people, think we should be kind to our poor people, right? And our candidate did not appear to be kind to the poor. May not be true. I mean, these are ones, I don't know about you, did you see that ad about Romney, where the stuff he did privately finally came out like a week left? Why I didn't see that all summer, and I have no idea, right? Mitt Romney is an incredibly good human being. Incredibly good human being. But we didn't see any of that side of him until the last week when it was frankly too late. He'd been defined. Why we didn't see the biography stuff in the summer about just amazing amounts of good work, the amount of money that they donate to charity. He's a wealthy guy, but my God, he puts his money where his mouth is. Unlike wealthy other people, Joe Biden, Bill Clinton in his underwear, right? This is a big deal. Cares about people like me. Obama won those voters 84-15. So again, this gets into that great divide of hearts versus minds, that if we can't figure out as conservatives how to get more into the heart, that doesn't mean we change our policies. I'm not saying be compassionate conservatives, but we've got to start talking with our hearts on the policies that matter, rather than the minds, okay? So here's what you'll read in the, so what do we do about it? Let me tell you what we don't need. Now recall, I currently run a think tank here in Ohio, Opportunity, Ohio. I work for a think tank in Washington, the Heritage Foundation. The last thing we need are more think tank things. We don't need more reports. We don't need more white papers. We simply don't. The intellectual firepower on Ohio has already been written. The reports done then when I was in charge of Buckeye, the reports we've done at Opportunity Ohio, there's not much more to say, there's not much more data to put out there. The key, what we need to do here in Ohio is we need a permanent infrastructure that focuses on identifying and educating Ohioans on key issues with the right message. Right? Do exactly what the Obama for America did beginning in March of '09 needs to happen now. Let me say to you, that cannot be controlled by the party. If it is, it will become about a candidate, and it will then rise or fall with the candidate.
Right.
Right? That's the whole lesson from DeWine and Kasich. It will be all about John Kasich and his re-election, which, fine, that's great, but we have other candidates and we have other causes that are equally important to Ohio's long-term health. So what we need is a permanent infrastructure that is not run by the party, that helps those candidates in 2014, and creates the right spade work for 2016, presidentially speaking.
Who runs that?
We need our version of Acorn.
Well, there's lots of things that are part of that, but you know, right now we've got Chris Littleton with Ohio Rising, C4 group, that's part of that answer. Opportunity Ohio is going to be part of the answer, doing purely education. You're not going to see me writing white papers. I don't really care about those. We need to get out there and educate. We need to identify and educate. And by the way, we've already done a whole lot of that work in the last 3 months. We know where the voters are. We know who they are. We got to actually start now going out and systematically, in an off-year election, educate them. Here's why, right? Anybody who are farmers? What's the worst thing you can do when it's been dry for 30 days? You want a rainstorm that just saturates it? Why?
Because you don't lose everything.
And that's just what happened with all the Rove and Koch brother and all that stuff. All those ads that pour in the last 3 months, they're hitting a ground that's not been tilled, that's been dry, and it just hits and falls right off. Right? I got more phone calls in the last 2 months.
That's why a lot.
And guess how many I listened to? Sorry, Seth, no offense. I heard it was you for a couple of them. But I didn't listen to a single one of them. I don't need that. Nobody likes robocalls. All the direct mail pieces into the garbage. Why? Because we've done none of the spade work in this state like the Obama folks did to target so that it wasn't just mass bombardment when our fields are dry and hard so the water just rolled right off. And I will say to you, if we don't do the spade work in the next 3 to 4 years, we will get the same result next time. The same result next time. And we've got to make sure we use it for issues, not just candidates, right? We've got to be about fixing our state. And there are going to be candidates who do that, and there are going to be issues that do that. Workplace freedom is one of those. There are others. Yes?
I'm just curious, how do you combat the lies?
Which lies?
Well, that Romney murdered that guy, and you know, he's
how do you combat them? You're in the trenches tilling the soil for 3 years before the campaign's begun. So that way we have the credibility that no candidate has the credibility, right? It's a campaign. But if we've tilled the soil, if we've created the spade work, if we have the stalks growing, our ability to actually persuade our neighbor is much better than if we come to them in mid-September and say, don't listen, that's a lie. Well, I don't know, I saw those ads this summer. Well, if they've been getting stuff for 3 years about our causes, about conservatism, right? About the free market. And again, we're using hearts versus minds. We can win those debates. We can't win them the way we do them today. I'm not saying that the Grove and the Koch brothers and that stuff's not good. It's a great investment. Don't get me wrong. That's kind of like, we need that for the last 2 months. But if we don't do the spade work in the 3 years before that, it's falling on deaf ears. We need both. And we don't have both right now on our side of the fence. We don't have both. Okay? That network, that distribution, those identifying folks, those folks also need to become the distribution network for the alternative media we've got to create. We've got to take the Jason Harts and the Jessies and Media Trackers. What they did was phenomenal work over the last 6 months in Ohio. And we need to expand what they do and create our own media empire that goes around, above, and below the mainstream media here in Ohio. So that way, those folks are getting our version of the world, our stuff, so that they can see and hear and absorb it, so that at least when they get the other side, they now have to measure and weigh. Right now, they don't get that at all.
Amen.
Yes, ma'am.
I was a candidate in 42 cities in 2 counties, and my husband and I decided we would spend the election day in the inner city of Cleveland putting lawn signs up, because we had gotten to every other city and some of the better neighborhoods in Cleveland, and we just decided. So we started at 11 and we went all the way to 7 o'clock. At absolutely every polling place, there were 3 to 5 Democrats there with a beautiful slate card. The names were on one side, the photographs were on the other side. 4 feet down was somebody cooking something, or cookies, and it was, I would have thought, had I gone 1 or 2 places, it was haphazard, but we probably went to 45 locations.
Right.
There was not one of us at any location. And the response I got was, well, who would listen to a Republican in that area? And I'm thinking, if we would do what you're saying, we could feel confident. Maybe not in every one of those.
Yeah, we don't need to win Cleveland, but we can't lose it by 60%.
Well, it just seemed to me
Right?
like we missed something there.
We missed lots there, right? We missed lots of voters, and we don't need to win. This is not. No, but I'm not going to be so dumb as to tell you we're ever going to win the Cleveland area.
No, I wasn't saying that either.
I know you're not. What I'm saying is your point is exactly right. We're not even in there.
Right.
So we're just ceding huge amounts of ground. If we can just cut Cleveland from 60 down to 58 or 57.5, it's a different outcome, right? Cincinnati matters more.
Right.
Okay? This is a numbers game. I'm a numbers person on this stuff, right? And that gets to the last piece, which is we need the C4 PAC state-based, not national stuff that flies in August, right? We need a CP4 here. Ohio Rising is that, I think. I'll argue with you that it is. And we need PAC, so that way we are controlling that stuff here and driving the accountability, the advocacy, and then the GOTV on our own, because we've identified it. We help our candidates win, we help our issues win. But those are the things that are going to happen if we're going to turn this state around.
The other thing about that is that National comes in within the last 2 weeks, and they just think they know your county better than anyone else who's been working on the ground for 6 or 8 months. They completely change and revise everything you've sort of organized to do, whereas if we had our own path,
That's right.
they could arrive, but they could not impact and change what we move forward to do.
No, I think that's exactly right. And so those are the pieces. Those are the pieces of what we need in place here at Ohio at the state level, controlled by non-candidates but conservatives, right? Who are out there. Let me just tell you what we did with Ohio Rising, with just a little bit of money. We hit over 500,000 phone calls, identified over 60,000 households who we thought were good, persuadable voters that we thought we could change and move. And with those folks, we then did an aggressive GOTV chase with them. And no, this was not only Ohio Rising. This is AFP Ohio, Heritage Action. Other groups contributed. But let me tell you, in the counties that Ohio Rising targeted, there were only 10 counties where the turnout increased from 208 to 212. Only 10 in all of Ohio. We targeted 4 of those, and in all 4, the turnout went up in our favor. In our favor. I will absolutely tell you, we were part of that, because we know who and where and when. We know really well those folks, but we didn't have enough money to do that statewide. We can only target so many counties, and we targeted them pretty well, but even then, it wasn't enough because, again, you can only do so much with so little. So I will say to you, and I'll take questions if we want, because I don't want to run into cess time here, so we've got about 11 minutes. But I will say to you, here's the upbeat part of this. 1976. Jimmy Carter beats Gerald Ford at a hotel down in LA. A bunch of people who worked real hard, heads were held low. Ronald Reagan walked in and said, "Don't hold your head down low. We will win and they will lose because our ideas are right and their ideas are wrong." 4 years later, he was president, as we all know. 1992, Bill Clinton beats George H.W. Bush at that same hotel in LA. A dejected group of conservatives and Republicans, heads held low. Ronald Reagan walked in and said, don't put your heads down. We will win because our ideas are right and their ideas are wrong. And so what I'm saying to you is ultimately we will win this battle. We frankly have to win this battle. But we have got to stop assuming that the battle is a federal battle to be won. If we are going to fix this country, it has to happen at the ground and move up. It will not come from Washington, no matter who we elect. And so if we want to take this country and turn it around, we've got to start here first and fix what's here and move that north and eventually fix Washington. Because we are at the edge of a precipice. We are on that razor's edge. And if we cannot pull back from that edge, we will go down the path that every country in the history of the world has gone on in terms of national decline. And if there's any country in the history of the world that can do that, it is this country. Because we are unlike any country that's ever existed. The people are unlike any people that have ever existed in this country. Our DNA is coded to fix and solve and fight. And so if we simply realize that we're in a hole, but we will scratch our way out, come hell or high water, but we've got to continue to fight, and we've got to learn our lessons, fix what didn't work, and go back to battle, we will save this country. So don't hold your head down low. We will win because our ideas are right, and their ideas are wrong. Let's fight another day. Thanks. Yes?
I have at least a modest concern that our DNA is changing. You know, the DNA of the children is different somewhat from the DNA of the parents. You can determine where its genesis is, but how do you, as a practical matter, cultivate that soil, as you talked about? How do we turn the cause into a message? How do we teach the message of conservatism to a country that is becoming more and more entitlement bound than the fighters and the scrappers that you're talking about? And how do we take what the liberal message is, immediate gratification, and translate into the heart what the conservative message is, which is a little bit more long-term?
Sure. Are your kids, they don't have the DNA?
Oh, yeah.
They do, right?
Yeah.
Your kids? I assume all of our kids do, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be a minority of us who have that, who pass it on to our own kids. There's more than you think. But remember, it was only a minority back in 1776 that fought an overwhelming group of people. And they won because their DNA was the stronger DNA. Their cause was the better cause. So I will say to you, don't think for a moment because there's more of them and fewer of us that they will win. Might does not make right in this country, and it never will. Have faith.
Thank you.
Is not the following true? We're talking about numbers here, and we're actually talking about numbers of people that voted. But then you compare the number of the people that voted with the number of adults who did not vote, there's a massive amount of those people. It seems to me, as I listen and, whatever, analyze whatever, that there's just a massive amount of quote-unquote untapped people that are just turned off because they haven't heard anything that inflames them.
Right. Or they've heard too much from one side.
Like, for instance, the robocall, and I voted for Romney, I'm just not negative for Romney, but I got so many robocalls from Romney, it just irritated me.
Well, of course it did, right? We all did. But let me just, look. Here is the reality. We've got to figure out how to re-engage the American people. Ohioans.
Right.
There's a reason why 11%, Congress has an 11% approval rating, right?
Right.
I mean, why would your neighbor think that it matters when they elect George W. Bush and they get Medicaid Part D, no child left behind, right? Now, how's that? Is that much different? I mean, remember the first stimulus package, right? The first massive tranche of money came out under Bush. Obama then went way up. But where is the bold colors versus the pale pastels that Reagan talked about?
Right.
They've been given pale pastels now for quite some time. We need to offer them the bold colors to bring them back into the fix, to tear down the cynicism that has coated their bodies, that makes it hard for them to see and hear.
Right.
And we will do that with bold ideas. Being the lighter version of them is never the answer. So those conservatives, those people saying that we need to moderate our message, we need to compromise on who we stand for, no, we don't. But we need to have a bold flag being flown. And Mitt Romney was not that bold flag.
I guess my contention is that if we divide the voters up, you know, conservative and liberal and all that, I mean, my point is, there's a lot of people out there, okay, if you got the conservatives and liberals, you get the conservatives, the liberals, and the independents, and you add them all up, it's still not anywhere near the majority of all the people.
Oh, no, it is.
What?
Say it again, maybe I didn't understand. What?
All I'm trying to say is, there are people out there that are not, quote unquote, measurable because they don't answer in polls. And I'm just saying that bold ideas will inflame people that otherwise were not useful and accountable, is what I'm saying.
Right, and that's why we have to have the spade work being done,
Right.
to identify, find them, communicate with them, so that we get them re-engaged in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, how can we worry about the voter who never votes when we can't even get the voter who has voted to show up?
Right. Right.
Right? When we can't even get to 2004 turnout. That's pretty bad.
Your talk is very inspiring, but my husband and I are of the opinion that in 4 years we won't have the America we have today. It will happen at fast. So we're extremely depressed in our home.
It will not happen that fast. No president has that kind of power. I know this is where I said you have to realize the majority of people don't think the way we think, right? But don't be so negative. 4 years, the worst he can do in 4 years is probably appoint a Supreme Court justice. But look, let's be honest. We've had more presidents over the last 30 years appoint more Supreme Court justices, and we're not any closer to the Constitution as it was understood in 1776.
Amen.
So I don't think Obama has that kind of control. And I know I may be a minority in this room on that.
We think
but,
on national
but
security and international issues that we are just going backwards at 100 miles an hour.
And we are going backwards, but remember, we are still the greatest nation on earth with a military that can project force like no other country can, that will maintain itself for 4 years. And don't think for a moment, there is a bright side to losing. We have an enormous number of great governors who are likely going to step forward in 4 years that did not this time, who will win.
Absolutely.
Look at the history of 3 straight wins by a party in the presidency over the last 100 years. Cut out Roosevelt.
We have an election in 2 years.
We do have an election in 2 years,
We could
right?
take the Senate in 2 years.
Right? So
Increase that.
think for a moment. The odds are weird. If we have the right candidate, we will win in 4 years and begin the path to renewal. The key, though, is if we're going to do that, regardless of who the candidate is, we've got to do the spade work. We
Right.
cannot rely
I don't
upon 3
disagree
months.
with you, but we're so downtrodden.
All right, I'm going to come to your house and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk.
Don't look at me up.
You mentioned something very important that you glanced over pretty quickly about the fact that your think tank looked into oil. I remember when I first learned about the shale oil, there was a tremendous amount of excitement.
Right.
And I remember hearing that it amounted to a great deal more oil than we've seen in a long time that could make us independent. And then I've seen Obama squash all of our oil production and all that stuff. We've got a huge ability to solve this very quickly. I'm wondering what you did look at in the oil and how significant that is in the thinking of Obama and our people who know that that oil is there and it's worth a heck of a lot of money.
Okay, yeah, you ready for my answer? You're not going to like this. Some of you won't like this. Obama's not our problem on oil and gas and all that. John Kasich's our problem. Trying to jack taxes up on our oil and gas is making Ohio less attractive. We went from the second most attractive place a year ago to 14th, cited his proposal to hike taxes as the reason why we're no longer as attractive as we were. That is the bottom line. So if you look at that report that's on the Opportunity Ohio website, opportunityohio.org, it was Obama's war on coal and Kasich's war on oil and gas. That is a problem.
Those are private.
We are chasing companies to Pennsylvania and other places because of this proposed increase on taxes. And it's a bad idea. So we can redistribute it to the big cities for re-election. That is not good tax policy. Let's reform our tax code, because Ohio's tax burden is too high, but taking it here to put it over here is not an answer, right? It's not an answer. And by the way, for many Ohioans, taxes just went up Tuesday because local levies got passed all over the state. So the net tax on Ohioans a year and a half into John Kasich's term are higher. They're never going to admit that, but they are. It's basic math.
Somebody told me a theory that on the fiscal cliff I'd like to hear your opinion on. They said that what the Republicans should do is fight like mad to get the spending down and have enforceable things that could, even if it's defense spending. And at the same time, giving it to Obama, let him raise taxes on people making over $250,000 and increase the capital gains tax. And this guy's theory was that's going to tank, both those things will tank the economy and we'll get a Republican in 4 years.
Listen, for my kids' 529 plan and my 401k plan, I hope that doesn't happen. Yeah. Now, for all the cash I have sitting elsewhere, well, I kind of hope it does happen because I like to buy really low, right? And then sit around for 30 years and watch myself, watch me get rich, right? But look. Here's the problem we have with fiscal cliff. And this is a problem. Our side will not cut defense. Will not cut defense. I'm part of the Heritage Foundation. Heritage Foundation is one of the most hardcore opponents of don't touch defense, in fact, increase it. I don't agree with Heritage on that. That's not my wheelhouse, but I think we've got to cut something. Defense is going to be on the table. But we won't cut that. They will not cut entitlements. Well, okay, you've now taken the four biggest pots, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and defense, off the table. What's left?
Not much.
So the likelihood is we're going to see taxes raised on the wealthy, defined as $250,000 and above. And that's going to, or they'll kick the can somehow on the rest of it. Maybe what do they kick to midterms? I don't know. If they kick it to the next 4 years, I don't know. But my guess is they're not going to solve it, and we're going to see a decline whether they address it or not. Because whatever solution they offer is going to be more like what Europe's doing with Spain and its own problem, Greece, and less of what would be a hardcore solution, Volcker Reagan 82, right?
But raising taxes on the quote-unquote rich and the capital gains tax will tank the economy.
I disagree, but that is the likely answer to any compromise is going to be higher taxes.
Matt, the amount of boomers retiring in the next 13 years is approximately 77 million.
Yeah.
And those people hitting Social Security and Medicare, there's an estimated unfunded mandate of approximately 70 trillion, which makes the 16 trillion chicken fees.
Sure.
Neither party is addressing that. What can be done about that?
Well, you know what? You're going to have folks work longer. They're going to have to get less benefits, right?
Or die early.
They're not going to die early, right? And look, of all the three programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security is actually the least crisis. If you just extend retirement ages and lower benefits a bit, even if you means test, you actually put the program on good footing for another 80, 100 years, right? It's Medicare, Medicaid that are the huge problems. But more importantly, it's also the debt, the interest on the national debt. That becomes, and what is it like by 2040, interest on the national debt will swallow 100% of federal revenue, right? No other program. There's nothing else funded but interest on the national debt repayment. That's the bigger
interest rates go to any more level.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so that, I mean, but here's the thing. this is what we don't talk about much. But I look at these things. You know, I love graham crackers. Love them. Can eat a whole pack. And you know, about 2 months ago, I'm sitting there eating a pack at 10 o'clock at night like I shouldn't. And I looked at my wife and said, these are smaller. And she said, what do you mean? I said, they're smaller. I know the size of a graham cracker. I eat them a lot. They're smaller. And whether it's a box of Cheez-Its, graham crackers, they're charging us the same or more, but they've squeezed things. You're getting less in your bag, you're getting smaller, right? And so that inflation is not being measured today. Nobody's calculating the shrinkage of stuff we get for the same amount of money, or frankly a little bit more. And that, when that finally starts to hit, you know, I said to my wife, we were driving, I said, oh, we should buy that house there. You know, just not for rental, but just buy it, right? And she said, why would we do that? I said, because right now, our cash is just sitting there losing value every single day that they keep interest rates low. Right? My daughters have little bank accounts, we written deposited money. Not a lot of money, right? And we look how much interest they earn. I started laughing. And I said, oh my God, it's been like 2 years, that's it? Because there's no money there. And so that's not being measured really. But eventually they're going to have to raise interest rates. And when that happens, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So you're going to see inflation like we've never seen or haven't seen in 30 years. Right? All right, we're really going into assess time, so I don't want to go too much longer.
Taxes in Obamacare, XL pipeline gone.
Taxes going up. Obamacare is not only fine, it's going to be...
All taxes in Obamacare.
Yeah, oh yeah, they're fine, yeah. And the XL, I mean, why would he change his mind? He didn't have to. He just won. I mean, this is what did he say yesterday? I just got a mandate for higher taxes. Right? George Bush did the same thing. He won by a small portion, said, American people have spoken my way. Well, Obama just did the same thing. So, you know, and that's right. What's he doing? Well, he's not going to negotiate from a position of weakness and say, all right, I'll give in on. He's going to say, taxes are going higher. And he'll give in on what that means. But he's going to win that debate. He's going to win that debate because, right, the fiscal cliff is happening. All right, Kelly's telling me to shush. Thank you very much. This is